Good morning again and welcome. We're really excited to be here and really excited that all of you are here, and this is a phenomenal turnout. And if you've been in our office the last few days, you might expect to find people climbing up and crawling in the windows because we had a lot more people that wanted to be here who either weren't able to be here or were kind of too late to get in the mix. So there was a method to our madness around the seating arrangements, but don't ask us what it was because I don't think any one of us could possibly articulate it at this point. We do know who you all are, but I don't think that you do. And some of us know some of you very well. Some of you might be newer to the mix, and I think it might be a good idea to get just some sense for you of what's represented in the room. So if you don't mind, I'll ask you to just kind of wave your arms and and you can do it more than once because many of us represent more than one thing and we're involved in more than one thing. But how many folks are here from the medical or healthcare community? Fantastic. That's great. How about child welfare self-sufficiency, the Department of Human Services? Great. Many of our friends are out there doing the work on the ground, but thank you for being here. Early childhood systems? Yeah, more than that, I'm guessing. How about mental health or addictions? Wow. Okay. Family support, family housing and other supports, anti-poverty supports for families, domestic violence. Super. How about the justice system, juvenile justice or criminal justice or the courts? Terrific. Education? Yay. Thank you for being here. How about all of the above or multiple systems, right? We all, right, thank you. Okay, you notice we did not have this meeting in Portland, right? We're here in Salem. Not very far from Portland, so just to keep ourselves honest, okay, who's here from the southern part of the state? Good. How about Central Oregon? Yeah, okay. How about east? Hood River, the Dalles out there, or southeast? Yeah, a few people. The I-5 corridor? Yeah. And the metro area?
Which metro?
Portland. Thank you. The coast? Oh, thank you. Okay, so obviously we have more work to do. I say our next meeting is going to be in Tillamook or Burns or Lakeview. How about that? So we really do want to be very inclusive, and it's challenging, and we obviously got a little ways, but not all the way. Just a few logistics. We want you to be comfortable. A 4-hour meeting is kind of a long time to hang out in one room. You will have noticed there's lovely spaces outside. If you want to step out, wander around, get up, be comfortable. The restrooms are that way. They're really easy to find. And if you need any help or assistance or have a concern or question, the staff, there's Leanne and other staff, will be standing up around the edges of the room. Just come grab us and we'll help you if we can.
Hey, Diane. Can we also ask how many peers or survivors are in the
Well, we can do that, or advocates. I meant to say advocates. How many advocate organizations are represented? Thank you, Stephen. Yep.
You're welcome.
Yep, it was on my list and I forgot. I probably forgot some other things as well. So you have a package with some information in it and some resources, and particularly for those of you that might be newer to this whole field, there's a handout on the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study and a list of other resources around trauma and trauma-informed care just for your use after you leave. There are also some toys on the table, some fidget toys, pipe cleaners, and rubber bands that is not saved for some kind of an exercise later in the day. You can use them anytime you want. It's actually good for your brain to multitask, so those are for you. And most important to me, there are some 3x5 cards on the table. There are some colored ones and some white ones. That is for your use when we say things that you have questions about, comments about, ideas that you might want to use in the breakout session. Some of you are thinking, why did they choose this trauma-informed name? It's such a buzzword. Why did they talk about healing and resilience? You can write it down. We'll get back to it. We will come around and collect those cards at lunchtime. If there are things you want us to respond to in the large group, you can do it anonymously. You can put your name and email address on it, and if we don't respond to it today, we'll respond to it later, or you can make notes to use in the breakout session. Okay. I'm not going to say much about the agenda because you have a copy of it in your packet. We hope we stay on time and we have a nice break for lunch. Worst case scenario, we will be morphing a little bit and having some overlap with eating and breakout sessions, but we're going to do our best to keep the presentations part of this fairly brief and limited and hear from you. But I do want to say something about the purpose of the meeting. We are brand new. Our feet are barely wet with this thing, and actually it was a stretch to conceptualize this meeting and put it together this fast, and it was a stretch to actually make it happen as well. But we really felt a sense of urgency, and that has to do with all of you and the work that you're doing, and the partners that we know personally, those of us on the leadership team and staff. We know how excited you are that the state is stepping up, that Addictions and Mental Health has stepped up to take some leadership in this area and to invest in creating some coherence around it. So we felt that we really wanted to move forward as fast as we could. And the other piece of it is, we all know what a huge map this is, all the way from those of you that are interested in primary prevention of adversity in childhood, to building resilience and buffering kids against the impacts of adversity, to providing direct services for folks you work with that are affected by trauma symptoms, all the way to the other end of how systems can work better with the most vulnerable families that are the most impacted by histories of trauma. That's a huge map. And so we decided at this meeting and getting started that we needed to be as open as possible, as inclusive as possible to bring people on board. And so this meeting is about hearing what you're doing and getting your input about what we ought to be doing. So with that, I'm going to ask our state partners to step up, starting with Amy Baker from Addictions and Mental Health. Well, you might have to walk. Oh.
She gets married?
There we go. Yes, thank you.
So, first of all, I want to say the word I was going to use was heartened, but seeing how many people who are actually here, I think the word now has changed to thrilled that all of you are here. What that says to me is that there are many, many people across the state of Oregon who really understand the importance and the impact of the adverse childhood experience and trauma on the human development, wellness, and basically the societal good of Oregon. So thank you all for being here. This is very impressive. The second thing I want to tell you is that the Oregon Health Authority is very committed to using this science to play into policy and practice. And the science that came out of the CDC Kaiser original ACEs study is very compelling. And so is the subsequent studies that have come out since then. Many of us have known for decades that the impact of child abuse and neglect can derail human potential. To actually see the longitudinal study and the impact on people's lives is so compelling that we can't ignore it. So I'm here for a couple of reasons. The AMH has done a couple of things. And the first is that we have passed a trauma policy. And I would be remiss not to recognize Kathleen Burns, who has been a true champion for that. Thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you.
And essentially what that trauma policy does is it states that AMH's, the programs that we certify and that we fund will be trauma informed. All right, okay, so obviously that's easier said than done. And we know that. And we know that it's not going to happen overnight. But that it is really important to set a course and a vision for where we're headed so that in terms of mental health services, that applying the lens of trauma becomes part of the work that we do, and that becomes ingrained into our entire system. And to start doing that, the very beginning point is having a policy, and that piece is now in place. The second thing that we've done that Diane was talking about is that we've really worked to stand up Trauma-Informed Oregon. This last legislative session, we got funding for a trauma initiative, and it was really specific to increasing trainings for trauma-informed care within the mental health system. And a bunch of us, including with the Children's Health Policy team, said, that's really important, and it's a really important piece of the puzzle. But if we only focus there, we're missing a lot. And that this initiative can't just be about healing trauma. It also has to be about ACE prevention. If we are ever going to get ahead of this public health epidemic, and it is a public health epidemic, then we have to look at the whole continuum. And so in those conversations, we started talking about what trauma-informed Oregon would look like, and that it really needs to span across systems. It can't just be mental health. It has to be primary care, which is such a great intervention point for mothers and young children. It's got to be child welfare, who works with some of the most vulnerable kids. It has to be juvenile justice, who has a significant portion of kids within their care who have horrible trauma histories. So we really have to cut across the system. And while we recognize that trauma impacts the entire lifespan, from a policy standpoint, we have to start thinking about preventing the transmission of ACEs from one generation to the next. Thank you. So, Trauma-Informed Oregon is basically a collaborative, and Diane's going to speak more to that, but it's really an impressive collaborative that includes OHSU to bring in the physical health folks, and PSU to bring in the academic folks, and the Oregon Pediatric Society that's really got their pulse on primary care and pediatricians out in the field. We have cultural representation, we have young adults, and we have families who are all part of that collaborative to really help us move this work forward. But as you know, this is not an effort that AMH, the little teeny tiny mental health division in the state of Oregon, can do by itself. And that's why we're here today with you. There's something beautiful about the state and local collaboration where you all have fantastic ideas, you're doing amazing things, you have this nimble agility to be able to try new approaches, and then to inform us around how does that work. And then we can look at that and say, is this something that can be applied statewide, or is this really specific to your community? And so we really see this as a collaboration between local communities and state partners. So that being said, I'm very, actually one other piece. When we talk about trauma, I don't think we can talk about trauma and adverse childhood experiences without talking about it in the context of social justice. That those two conversations go together hand in hand. And that we can look at what happens specifically to kids in their early childhood experience or their childhood experience. But you have to look at it in the context of what's happened to that community historically, and then you have to look at it in terms of what's happening to that community now. And what are the ways in which poverty and racism and classism impact that community's ability to be resilient. So with that being said, I would like to introduce my fabulous partner, Lois Day, from Child Welfare. And I get this question not so often, depending on who I talk to, but you know, when people get really excited about this work, they say, where do we find these kids? Like, where do we find these families so that we can intervene early and really do something and really make a difference? And I don't have to look very far to my partners in child welfare to say, I know somebody who knows where they are. So really, we can't do this work without child welfare. And that being said, I would like to introduce Lois Day. She is the Director of Child Welfare.
thought they were going to make us sit up there, so I put all my stuff up there. And you'll note on this slide that
Can you hear her? Do we need to move the mic down?
I so admire Amy Baker that I changed my name. I'm going to make it legal, Amy.
Okay, I own it. And Leanne didn't catch it.
I always want to be further, closer to the beginning of the alphabet.
Oh my God. Well, I didn't notice that earlier today.
Thank you all for coming. You know, like Amy says, where do we find these families? I was at a meeting earlier this year, and it was about trauma, and I had a group of staff sitting with me around the table, and we were all having this conversation. We kind of looked at each other and said, our program is one enormous trauma. I mean, the whole program is trauma. It's families in incredible distress, children at incredible risk, and we create more trauma. We intervene with a view towards assisting, and then we sometimes take kids away, creating trauma. We put them into a system that is really actually a very good system, but inherent in the foster care system, there's added trauma. So we figured out we're at the very end of the trauma spectrum, just this side of the prisons, really, in terms of how distressed families are when they come to us. And in child welfare, we've known for a long time about trauma and the impacts trauma has. And as usually is the case, in Oregon, our staff on the line have pushed that up to us in central office and said, you got to do something about this for our families, for the children that are coming into care, and for us that are interacting with them on a daily basis. Because guess what? That's traumatic for workers. So we have been doing some work around this, and really we're excited, frankly, that the health field is excited about addressing trauma. We've been trying to design our system so that in child welfare we intervene earlier with families before there's the accumulated trauma. Many of you have heard me talk about how our caseloads in Oregon in child welfare are dominated by families who are where children are experiencing neglect. Not what you think of as sort of a classic abuse, but it's an accumulation of incidences, omissions, or actions that are traumatic for children that really accumulate over time. And it takes a long time for that to come to the attention of the child welfare agency at a level we can intervene. And that's too late. That's very much too late. And why are children experiencing neglect? Because families are stressed. They're stressed economically. There's not enough resources. They have inappropriate coping strategies like, you lose your job, you might start drinking or using, and that just accumulates. And these families need the intervention and the assistance way earlier than my program. We are the tail end of what is happening with families. So to have everybody in this room who really does touch families well before we do is so heartening for the child welfare system, and we think it's going to help put us not out of business, but help hopefully reduce the number of families that experience our intervention. So as I said, things kind of boil up from the field, and they finally, with central office, oh, okay, sure, we need some trauma-informed practice training. We need to support workers in a way so that they can engage with families, recognizing the trauma response that they get from them, and being effective in their engagement to move them beyond that. So we're redesigning our core training for workers, and we've asked that at the very first training, mandatory for every worker that's going to work in the field with families, is trauma-informed practice and strategies. And we've had some pieces of that in different places in our training, but really now it's going to be very focused, very intentional, and the very first thing you have to have before you can progress to other areas of training. Several years ago, we have a process called a critical incident review process. When a child dies that was known to the department, we have this critical incident team. We engage and review that to see if there's systemic issues that we should address that come out of that case. And what staff has told us, which is sort of a no-brainer, is it's very stressful for them when we do that, because they have the stress first of a child know to the department, they know their family dies. And the second is that then central office comes in and wants to look at everything, which is, again, very stressful for them. So several years ago, we brought in some trainers, and we trained them to do trauma. We have trauma response team that can be engaged to actually go out in the field by request and help workers move through the trauma of that fatality while they're still trying to do their jobs. So, and we learned that from first responders, law enforcement, fire departments, where they have mandatory trauma response for them. Ours is still voluntary, but it's kind of spread, and what it's done too is allowed us to train people in the field to be available to their peers in the branches. So we can engage a team and bring them in, but those trained folks are in the field. We'll be bringing them in for different places for a specific trauma response, but they're available to workers in the offices. And why that's important to me is because that helps us keep good, experienced workers who can keep engaging with families when we're responsive to their needs around how hard this work is. So I'm hopeful, too, that out of this collaboration, we can be responsive to families, and we can also be responsive to the people doing the work, so they'll keep coming to work and doing the good work they do with families. And then I wanted to just mention one other thing, which is the issue that Amy raised around like cultural trauma. Separate from individual trauma, we know that in our Native American population they have a history in Oregon that in and of itself, just knowing the history is traumatic for the members of those tribes. And in our system, our child welfare system, we have a disproportionate number of Native American children that are in care. We have a disproportionate number of African American children that are in care. And by making our systems more trauma responsive, it's my hope that we can be more responsive to those communities and really work on rectifying that disproportionate representation and what that means to those communities and their children interacting with our system. So we can't lose sight in looking at the individual ACEs of the broader picture of how communities have been impacted by our interventions and by our culture itself, and put that on the table as well as we move forward with this. So thank you so much for being here, and hopefully you'll stick with us, and maybe we'll see you in Lakeside. It's Lakeview, is that what we're doing?
Lakeview.
Good. And I hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I didn't.
That's okay.
Okay, sorry.
I'm going to ask Atif Malani from OHSU to come up as well. Thanks, Bob.
Well, as a third baker in the crowd, it's Atif Baker. I'm a child psychiatrist. I'm director of the Division of Child Psychiatry at OHSU, and I also have a position with Oregon Health Authority. So I have the great privilege of working with Amy and Kathleen and the team in AMH, which is a small team. I also work with Kevin George and the well-being unit of DHS. And I think it's just simply astonishing to have this gathering. If you really think about 10 years ago, would we ever have conceived of a place that we had a CCO that had resilience workers going out to help their most challenged clients? Would we have had a place that has a program called the MISH program that helps youth and families who are under stress so that they don't utilize the health system repeatedly to deal with their own traumatic experiences? Would we even have had this conference? 10 years ago, to imagine that we would have had this conference was unimaginable. And I think the reason for this is that in the health system, in the mental health system, and in the social services system, we have known about and understood that trauma impacts human development, human behavior, outcomes for populations. We've known this for decades. In the mental health system, we studied the impact of war on our veterans, starting with terms like battle fatigue and the Vietnam War. Even Freud questioned his own perspective on is hysteria or symptoms that people have the result of psychological conflict or the result of actual trauma. These concepts are not new, but what changed very dramatically was the science of what we know. And as the brain science around trauma grew, the ACEs study happened. And truly, it's a profound turning point that I think has led to the energy behind this. I don't think the legislature might have addressed the issue of trauma as aggressively if we hadn't thought about the connection of trauma to adverse health outcomes and how adverse health outcomes are all driven, it appears, by traumatic life experience. If we're ever to overcome the burgeoning cost of healthcare, we are going to have to do something about how trauma impacts the population and health outcomes. So that moment when I first read the ACEs study, which has been around since the late 90s, right, 99 or 8. When I first read it, I just couldn't believe my eyes. I said, this is the data that supports what I thought I knew, but here it is right here, and what a profound impact it's had. The drumbeat of this is now, again, very powerful in mental health and social justice and in public policy. It is now catching up in the health system. And one example of that is psychiatrists talked about biopsychosocial view, the biopsychosocial view of human beings, understanding the biology, the psychology, and the social elements of what happens to people that lead to their coming to our offices. But pediatrics and primary care really didn't think about these things quite this way, and yet now they have taken a leadership role in looking at the impact of trauma on development. They have a term called eco-biodevelopmental, and really if you look at each of those terms, think about the environment comes first, what's around you impacts the very nature of our own development from a chromosomal level. I mean, some of you probably know this, but chronic persistent trauma can shorten one's life through impacting the length of our very chromosomes as they divide, and this is a profound notion. So now that it's become a buzzword, it's become an area of great importance to primary care. It's always been an importance to us in mental health and in policy. We have an opportunity to bridge the gap between systems that traditionally have not talked together. Still to this day, in spite of how enlightened we feel we're becoming, do mental health organizations communicate well with primary care systems? No, they don't. CCO, coordinated care organizations, their strategy is to integrate health so that mental health, physical health, dental health, these things are all in the same place and people are talking to each other. It's just still not happening. ACEs is going to drive this, the ACEs study, and are learning about the core resilience that attachment allows us. So the capacity for attachment, the creation of empathy, is really the solution long-term to preventing the transmission of trauma generationally. We have to get at how do we support strong attachment, because that is the source of later resilience. That's the core strategy, and if we think about that, it drives what we think about we should do in terms of intervention strategies, primary prevention. So another form of primary prevention is teaching our healthcare providers early in the first aspects of their training. This is why OHSU is involved and wants to pull in other folks who train healthcare providers. If you bring the notion of trauma and its impact on human development early in the process of learning, we're more likely to have that as a drumbeat that goes on throughout one's career. When you bring your child who's had a trauma history to your primary care setting, you want that office staff primary care provider and the team around them to be prepared to react differently to what they see in the child and family. To not overreact or to underreact, but to recognize that people's presenting challenges reflect their histories. And to be able to pause and think that through and take a different approach is really going to require us to shift our entire focus, and that starts early. So I'm extraordinarily amazed and excited. I have to say that what I'd love to see over time is to see some people of color in our audience. It'd be nice to see perhaps more men involved over time. I think that probably means that we just got to make sure that our tent is big enough and inclusive enough to really get a range of people's perspectives and wisdom. I think if we do that together, Oregon is in a unique place to be a leader in this field, in spite of our website for healthcare enrollment. Don't let that drag us down. We can still be a leader. So we're thrilled to be. I'm thrilled to be a participant in this process, and just thankful that all of you are here and for this opportunity to learn from you. Thank you.
Wow, thank you all very much, all three. Really, powerful inspiration for all of us. You've been a great audience so far, but it's time for a quiz. This is an Oregon-wide effort, right? And so there's a lot of interesting facts about Oregon, and we thought it would be fun to learn some of them together, and some of you will know them, and also, frankly, it's just good for your brains to switch it up a little bit and do something more active, because you've got another few minutes to listen to us before we break out. So if you know the answer to these questions, please call them out loudly and right away, otherwise I'm going to feel like an idiot up here. So I need your help. Okay, this first one's easy. How many counties in Oregon? 32. Yes. What city in Oregon has one of the only 3 outdoor city elevators in the world?
Oregon City.
Oh my God, you guys are awesome. The other 2, I believe, Lisbon and Salvador da Bahia? Yeah? I don't know. I could be wrong about that. Yes. What's Oregon's official state beverage? And I'm sorry to say it is not IPA. It's not even beer. I'm really sorry. But what is it? Try again. Milk. So if we had somebody from Tillamook, they would know that. So maybe the next meeting needs to be in Tillamook, right? So what are Oregon's state colors?
Orange, black.
Navy blue and gold. And why on earth would we not have used those for our logo? Don't answer that. We might come back to that later. Okay. I am going to try to give you a little bit of a quick overview of what we think this HIT is, this Trauma-Informed Oregon, and what we're charged to do. I'm actually going to switch this up a little bit because I want to introduce the leadership team and the staff first, because I want you to be able to put names and faces together. And so I would ask that our leadership team folks stand up when I talk about you. Amy talked about the partnerships, and these are some of the folks. And actually, this leadership team grew out of the very small number of us that met for the first time, and some of us met each other for the first time in this meeting in Ajit's office, where we were invited to hurry up and put a proposal together as fast as we possibly could to get this thing off the ground. And it's been quite a journey since then, actually.